Because this segment is about cultivating a neutral pelvis, I wanted to add this piece before we practice. I want to talk a bit about the most common body misalignment that I see. This is a very prominent postural problem. Not everybody has this, of course, but a lot of people do. It affects the whole body and it's called a forward shifted pelvis, and I'll show you what I mean. So in a forward shifted pelvis, the whole pelvic segment of the body goes forward in space. So the pelvis goes forward of the natural vertical axis. Now this is distinct from a tilted pelvis, like an anterior pelvic tilt, which also can happen, or a posterior pelvic tilt. This is when the pelvis is actually forward in space. So the pelvis is over the toes instead of being back over the ankles and the arches. Okay, now a forward shift can be coupled with an anterior tilt, or it can be coupled with a posterior tilt, or not. So I want to really focus right now on the forward shift aspect of this aberration. So whenever something in the body goes forward, something else goes back. And that's the way that your body compensates to stay upright. Otherwise you'd fall over, right? If something in the body goes right, something else will go left. So here, the pelvis goes forward, and often the knees go back and the rib cage goes back, right? So if you have this forward pelvis and then a back rib cage, then often the head goes forward. So we end up with this zigzag situation in the body, and it's really not good for you. In fact, it hurts my back a little bit just to demonstrate that, so I don't want to stay there for too long. So maybe this looks or feels familiar to you. Maybe you recognize this as something you see out in the world or in people you know, or maybe you recognize it in yourself. So in this situation, just the downward pull of gravity is compressing in certain areas, especially the lower back, because your body isn't stacked properly. So why does this happen? There are a lot of different reasons, and it can be a different constellation of things that will result in this posture from person to person. But one thing that often contributes to this forward shifted pelvis is tightness and shortness in the hamstrings and groins, inner thighs. So if your pelvis is being pulled down, tugged downward by these tight muscles that connect to the pelvis from underneath, then it can immobilize the pelvis and pull the pelvis forward, and it can make it be stuck in that position. So the pelvis then can't bounce and float and undulate. Okay, so in this case, if you work on hamstring and adductor length and suppleness and flexibility, then it can help a lot. But this forward shifted pelvis can also be caused by originally potentially hyperextended knees. It actually can happen as a result of hypermobility. So it's tricky because hypomobility or hypermobility in constitution can both lead to this forward shifted pelvis. So very different body constitutions can land here. It can be because of abdominal shortness or holding, or it can even originate from a tendency towards kyphosis or a rounded upper back. But whatever is the reason for the forward shifted pelvis, now these patterns are all linked and perpetuating each other. So one of the biggest problems with this is that a lot of people will attempt to correct the upper body issues without addressing the pelvis displacement. And this is a mistake. So I'll show you what I mean by this. So like I said before, when the pelvis goes forward, often the rib cage, the upper back goes back. And that in turn will often create an anterior head. And a lot of people will notice the upper body portion of this and try to muscle themselves out of that position by lifting their chest, trying to straighten their upper back in this way. And you will work so hard if you do this and not address your pelvis. You'll add more layers of tension and contraction, and you won't get anywhere. So here's what you do. You need to work from the floor, work from the bottom up, and address the position of the pelvis. So no matter what factors have led you to this position, this could be a really constructive way to work. So if the pelvis is forward and the rib cage is back and the head is forward and maybe the knees are back, and this is the situation, first you want to organize yourself as best as you can, just thinking of your legs and feet being really under you. So invite this sense that your legs are like architectural columns of support, supporting everything that's above them. So in a sense, come into your legs, feel that your feet and ankles and shins are under you, and then bring your attention to the top area of your frontal thighs. So the very upper frontal thighs here, and even across the front of the pelvis a bit. But I like to really think of those upper thighs in the front. And from those upper thighs in the front, you're gonna think of moving them back. So the frontal upper thighs are gonna go back in space. And that's gonna move your pelvis back so that your pelvis is over your ankles, right? Instead of over your toenails. So adjusting from the tops of the thighs back in space. Now, if you overdo this, you might feel that it brings you to an anterior tilt, or you might feel it lifts the buttocks. And, just play with it. You don't want to overdo it, but when you're exploring, it's also okay to exaggerate a little bit and feel the edges of the range of motion. But ultimately, what I want you to do is feel that the top thighs can go back. And it's like putting your car in reverse a few inches. So you're letting the pelvis move back in space. Now, for some of you, this might make you feel like you're hinging forward at your hips because you're used to the rib cage being back and the pelvis being forward. When you start to bring the pelvis back, it's going to have an effect on your upper body. So whatever it does, I want you to stay soft and receptive and play with it, okay? So what you want is to let this adjustment of your pelvis position have an impact going up through your body. So you're gonna just play with that, see how then you can soften and let your rib cage and your shoulders and your head readjust. What's important is that you get your legs under you and you let your pelvis move back and start to feel that your pelvis comes out of that forward place. So, I often encourage people to practice a holistic repositioning like this in a designated practice time only. But for this one, with the forward shifted pelvis, I do sometimes say, go ahead and do this gently throughout the day at your standing desk, washing the dishes, waiting online at the store. You can really integrate this into your daily life. It's not a muscly adjustment, it's a gentle repositioning of the bones. So again, for many corrections, for many versions of corrective exercise, it would be too much to do it through the day. But for this one, I think you can. For breaking this habit, I think it's actually necessary to bring it into your daily life as long as you stay in your whole body. So feel the floor, organize your legs, adjust your pelvis, and stay soft enough up top to let that change happen all the way through your upper body in an exploratory way with curiosity and gentleness, no aggression. So I hope this helps. See you soon.